we're going to be going to Malta now for our last bit of discussion. Dave, it's obviously a huge year for Malta, especially for tourism, because obviously there's so many festivals going on, and we were both lucky enough to attend 2 of the many festivals going on over on the tiny little island just south of Italy. However, one of the reports that's just come out not long ago, it was done by the Instagram account Side Street Malta, and it was basically an opinion piece by the Instagram account Jordan_GP_. And essentially what we're talking about here is a cautionary tale, if you like, of what's going on in Malta at the moment, which states, of the title, quotes, "Nothing beats up Malta like a Jet 2 holiday." So what's going on here? So to provide some extra context, with an influx of festivals, parties, and new club openings, at Side Street Malta reports that over-tourism and over-development of hotels is an increasing issue on the island, as the small nation tries to accommodate mass tourism in a short period of time. So is Malta doing too much? Can it cope, or is this just a myth? Side Street Malta /Jordan GP writes, quote, "Malta isn't just overcrowded, it's overwhelmed by constant noise, non-stop construction, and rising tension. The island's charm is fading into chaos, leaving residents with less space, less peace, and growing stress. The situation isn't normal, and it demands attention." And we've just got a few more bits here. So the opinion piece further writes here in these imageries, for those who can't see, quote, "I'm not against tourism. I've traveled, I've studied abroad. I love sharing Malta with people, but what's happening here isn't tourism. It's erosion of peace, space, and sanity. Every morning, the soundtrack is drilling, not birds, not waves, not silence. Hotels open next to construction sites. People eat breakfast with concrete dust in the air. This isn't hospitality. It's chaos disguised as progress." Then it further on says, "Search Malta on TikTok. You won't find Medina at golden hour or the quiet magic of," oh God, it's going to be a hard thing to pronounce, Gyarlapsi. "You'll find fights in Paceville, crowds throwing up in the street, and videos comparing Malta to war zones. That's what's going viral, not our beauty." What they tell me abroad, when I tell people I'm from Malta, they don't mention the sea or the temples or the sunsets, or our sunset, sorry. They say their friends came here and saw filth, noise, and madness. This is what our image has become, and it's heartbreaking. What kind of success? They call it success, but what kind of success squeezes its own people to the edge? We've turned neighborhoods into party zones. We've let noise replace peace, and we're told to be thankful. That's not growth, that's burnout. Malta is full, not with people, but with pressure, with noise, and with tension. It's not anti-tourist to say this. It's pro-resident and pro-sanity. It's survival. Stop telling us this is normal, because it's not. And that was by, there you go, there's the photo of the chap, Jordan Galea Pace. And as you can see there, having an opinion that you would like to share, DM or email the Side Street Malta team, hello@sidestreetmalta.com. And so, yeah, that is the roundup of the opinion piece of what's going on in Malta. Now, obviously, me and Dave both were in Malta in May. Dave Collins, I'm going to turn to you, because I would argue we were shielded from a lot of this just because we were in St. Paul's Bay, aka Bejiba, where there was a bit of development, but not loads of it. But Dave, how do you unpack what you've just heard?
I think he's on point. I think this is a journey Ibiza's been through, to be honest with you. And I think the Ibiza of 40 years ago is extremely different to how it looks now. Do you know what I mean? But to get there, it almost sacrificed something, you know? It got rid of something. And I think there's elements of that still in Ibiza. I think there's traces of that sort of original vibe that people still try and keep alive. But I mean, taking it back to Malta, I think the one thing I'm thinking of here, I'm making up a term in my head, but I call it like the tourist industrialization. Do you know what I mean? And it's the idea that once somewhere gets popular with tourists, for like music or even just sort of like hotels and stuff like that, demolish everything and just build hotel, fast food joint, fast food joint, fast food joint. Get rid of everything that made it unique in the first place, because that doesn't sell. What sells is Burger King and a massive Hilton hotel sort of thing. So like that's sort of like, you need to preserve what your culture's about, what your city's about. And I'm not saying get rid of tourism overall, and I'm not even saying get rid of music, because that's what Ibiza's doing. They're targeting music as the enemy, basically, because that industrialization I just explained has become part of the music over there. But you can integrate the music with the existing infrastructure. You can have a little tiny street party in some really sort of traditional sort of type environment. You don't have to have a huge stage show. And if you do want to build the huge stage shows, I actually think what Malta's done already is actually a good idea, where the clubs are sort of out the way in the middle of nowhere, essentially. And so, you still can have those big stage shows, but the cities and the towns can still retain their character. I think a lot of this is just down to the planning of the government over there, right? And just, approving the right things and denying other things. I'll tell you one thing I learned last week. In Ibiza, in San Antonio.
Yep.
Did you know that all the restrictions that the Ibiza government have put in, you can't actually start a bar now. You can't launch a bar because they only allow a certain amount of bars to exist.
Really?
And it's full. Yeah. So that if there's a bar, if you want to start up, if you want to buy a house in Ibiza or buy a street side venue and says, I'm going to sell alcohol, they'll say, no, you're not allowed to.
Just point blank refused.
But you know what you can do? You can turn it into a hotel that plays music.
Oh, right, but it can't be a bar.
But it can't be a bar.
What about
a
club?
No, but it can be a hotel. Do you see what I mean? And it's like, oh, okay, Ibiza Rocks makes sense now. You know what I mean? That's a hotel. That's also a club. And there's all these little tiny things people are doing to try and get around those restrictions. But the reason I mention that is because it's a knee-jerk reaction to literally people having the perspective of clubs are literally destroying our space, our environment. I went to one place that was allegedly a huge club back in the day, like a daytime rave place. But it has to be a restaurant now because it lost its club license years ago. So the reason I explain this is because that's sort of like what happens at the end game scenario. Once your city's in kind of a poor state and stuff, you have to sort of resort to these really harsh measures. But I think the best way to do it is integrate it with your current sort of town and culture, And if a little village wants to host like a little DJ party, yeah, great. It won't necessarily get overrun with Brits. You know what I mean? Like, it depends how you do it. You don't have to have a lineup full of like the latest record label. Have some local DJs from Malta. I'd love that. Some actual like talent I've never seen before. But yeah, it's horrible to sort of see it like that. But it's like the locust swarm of the dance music industry descends on a place and they industrialize the heck out of it through money, basically. And then it loses its identity along the way because the temptation is to build festival stages, massive hotels, club hotels, and it's like the little church in the middle of town is all of a sudden an oddball. You know what I mean? 'Cause it's surrounded by this stuff. So yeah,
it's a very interesting time actually, and yeah, what you mentioned there is definitely a valid point. And actually, I think another bit of context for those who have not been to Malta or may not have even heard of it. And I'll get you to describe it, Dave. Just how small is Malta?
It is quite small. Yeah, definitely. It's a fortress island, quite literally. So it's throughout history, everyone's tried to take Malta because of its position in the Med. So it's got a lot of rich history because of that. We're going back all the way to one of their big things is like Little Knights, because it's, it goes all the way back to those it goes even further back, actually. It goes to like, they found ruins there from like literally like I think Stone Age level stuff. But yeah, it's literally a fortress island, and so like the main capital, Valletta, is literally like it's literally like a fortress coming out of the ocean, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they've got bits left over from World War II. They've got pillboxes that are sort of dismanned now because it's a big World War II target. And so it's got such a rich history and culture, sort of thing. And yeah, it would be a shame to see it turned into, basically Las Vegas in the ocean. That's basically what I've been explaining, isn't it? So
yeah, and that's it, and that's it, and that's one thing I was going to say, actually, because it is. I can definitely say that I can see where Jordan, sorry, I can see where Jordan is coming from, because I think one of the key issues here is the idea of expansion, because I'm not aware of what planning, regulation zones, and yada yada, like all that stuff. I have no idea. This is just from an outsider looking in, and I'm sure you can sort of grasp a bit of this as well, Dave. But if you remember, like, and the city you mentioned, Valletta, the capital, that entire peninsula is UNESCO World Heritage.
sure.
No one can touch that at all. You cannot develop on it at all. So therefore, those that want to build or create or put something new in there, like a new business or whatever, they've got to go to either like the big city area, which sort of encompasses I'm trying to get my geography right, Gezira, Slima, St. Julian's Bay. I'm sure I'm missing another area out, but all of that area is like the built up big city area, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Roughly. Now, we've been there. And if you remember as well, the density of some of these streets is actually kind of mind blowing, because there's not a lot of space, is there, for
No, it's very
new
small.
construction?
Yeah.
So I get it when they say, there were reports of like people trying to have their breakfast outside, but they're getting it covered in concrete dust because of the nearby construction. However, that sounds bad, and I get it, and it is bad. However, I think a little bit of extra context should be applied here to say the density of Malta in cities and so on is incredible because the island is so small, right? Because
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
it's like you are literally next door to loads of stuff, right? And that's why there's quite a few high rises as well, because the only way is up. You can't spread out, right?
Right.
So there's definitely a bit of that going on in Malta as well. But I will say, where we stayed in Brziba, like I said earlier, not a great amount of development going on there. And I would actually argue some of the construction we saw actually looks pretty good. There was like a new beach club that sorry, a new pool beach club that was currently getting constructed, and a benefit of it was they had too much construction sand, so they just placed
Turn
it
into a
in a
beach.
public area
Yeah.
next door, and they've now made a beach, which is
Yeah.
great, right?
Yeah, I think it's positive. The question you got to ask yourself, though, is in the process of building that thing, did they destroy something else? Right? Did they literally knock down a building that'd been there for thousands of years just to build a pool party place there? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's where it gets destructive. Like,
Yeah.
so you need to make sure the two coexist. And in fact, in Bajiba, there's a great example of this. They had all the beach bars and everything, but they had some. I remember that Italian restaurant we went in, and it was just sort of like so tiny and traditional. At least it felt it to me.
Oh yeah.
And it is obvious that that place had been many things over the years. It existed. It wasn't just knocked down, and it wasn't just turned into like a fast food chain. You know what I mean? So that's like, you got to think like progression is good, but progression doesn't always mean you have to destroy what's already there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's hard, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, yeah, like I do remember that little tiny Italian restaurant. That was really, really nice. And yeah, like you said, a very old, steeped in history from what we gathered. But what I would ask, actually, and you mentioned it earlier, is that obviously places like Uno Village and Jampula Village, which is the competitor, both in the middle of the island, not really near um, residential dwellings, to my knowledge. But that's what it seems like whenever you turn up there. But I would like to ask you quickly about festivals in Malta. Do you think it's overkill, or do you think it's just whilst the sun's out, let's get everyone over?
How do you mean overkill? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, because one thing I will say is that from an outsider looking in, it does seem like there's a lot of festivals going on over
Oh,
there.
the amount of them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know?
I think it's become a hotspot for it just because of what the island is. You know what I mean? Um, I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I think that's actually really good. But I always say there's a different festival every week in Malta,
Yeah,
and you go
it's
there.
literally like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you go there when you get the festivals on that you really like, and that's pretty cool. I can vibe with that. Um, that's almost sort of more convenient than Ibiza in some regards. Do you know what I mean? Because you can go and concentrate your sort of gigs to like just the weekend. So you can literally fly out on a Friday, come back on a Monday, and
Yeah.
because festivals are so packed anyway. You literally have 6 venues over the weekend, right? Because you have a day party and a night party. So that's like 2, 4, 6. If you really went nuts. So yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of good for that. Don't get me wrong. Like, yeah, it's totally a thing, but you need to make sure that doesn't impact what they're saying here. So I think doing it at Uno is completely fine because, from what I can understand, Uno is kind of like you on its own, a middle of nowhere sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, I'd feel a bit annoyed if there's a festival every single day in Valletta, you know what I mean, or like
Oh
on my
yeah,
son's
yeah.
doorstep. Yeah, so it's where it happens totally.
Yeah, and what would you say to the quote here that says this isn't hospitality, it's chaos disguised as progress. And
Mm.
it says here also hotels open next to construction sites and people eat breakfast with concrete dust in the air. Now that if I'm not mistaken, he is relating to a clip. There was a viral clip that I saw a while ago, and annoyingly I didn't save it for the podcast, but those may have seen it, and it was people on like a rooftop pool area, and there was loads of construction literally next door, and it was like that. Basically, they were drilling through solid reinforced concrete, I was assuming, and all of those concrete dust particles and so on was all going up into the air and then going straight over into that rooftop area, and it was just basically contaminating, if you like, that entire
Sure.
area where they were eating and even the pool as well. But like, what I would ask, who's really to blame here? Is it people accepting the planning permission to say you can build it there? Is it the construction workers? Is it the hotel? Like, because the thing is, if you're a paying tourist and you go to this hotel and you have this type of disruption, it's hard to say who's at fault here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to point fingers when ultimately what's happening is you've got a lot of people, a lot of growth is happening in very fast periods, sort of thing, which is exactly what's happening in Malta right now. And I think that's good generally for a country to have fast growth. I suppose you just need to ask how it's being done. So I have no doubt in 10 years Malta's going to have quite a big tourist infrastructure sort of thing. I think the construction will slow down at some point,
Mm.
but I don't know. Do you slow down the construction to one thing at a time and sacrifice growth, or do you let people go nuts with growth and sort of for a while, sort of wreck the local environment a little bit as you're building things? A part of me thinks a little bit the building regulations as well, right? Because I don't know much about this, but surely there's regulations that you shouldn't really do stuff like that in sort of urban environments, right? Let concrete dust spew around everywhere, you know what I mean? But I don't really know, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I can shine a little bit of light on that. I mean, I don't really know much about the Maltese construction building regulations, but I know that over here in the UK, considerations always must be made to control the spreading of dust, concrete dust, and particles, because not only does it make things dirty, but it's obviously not very good for you to breathe it in,
Yeah,
because we're
totally.
literally talking about concrete particles here, for God's
But it's
sake.
like pollution, like really bad pollution at that. So yeah,
Oh,
it's
absolutely. And yeah, I will. And I mean, I will say, like, I don't want to bash on the Maltese construction industry, but like, do you remember in Bejiba when they were like trying to install those window panels on that high rise in Bejiba? Do you remember the method they were doing it in? Do you remember that random like conveyor belt lift thing?
Oh yeah, they actually, yeah. It
And
was
they
very
didn't cordon
sketched.
any of it off.
Yeah.
You could
And
literally walk
again,
underneath it.
yeah, I think there's probably a little bit thing going on here with that as well. That's why I was thinking it. I remember seeing a guy like just walking around with no harnesses or anything on like these massive
Yeah.
skeletons of high-rise buildings, and I was like, wow, that's a bit scary. So yeah.
Yeah, and in closing, like, obviously the opinion piece is basically suggesting that obviously the developments going on there is just causing chaos for residents and so on. And obviously there was obviously the example of this, people eating breakfast and there was concrete dust in the air. But you know, if residents are, you know, coming all together to say, you know, we don't like this, we need changes, and then but all the tourism is continuing to be influxing into the island. If you are in local government or in this type of power, what's the answer? Dave Collins.
It's tough. I mean, the government should listen to the people at the end of the day. That's sort of like what government's for. But you need to sort of realize that the country also has industries it needs to sort of aim for. It needs to get money, income, right?
Mm,
So that's like a really hard bit. And I think, like I mentioned Ibiza, but I just think it's going through the same journey Ibiza did to a large degree, you know? And I think the main part of it is you need to just make sure you retain your heritage of your country. Don't just turn it into Las Vegas sort of thing. And not that I've got anything against Las Vegas, but it's the idea that you just build overnight like a theme park for adults. Like that's not really what you should do to Malta, you know. You just need to take consideration on how it evolves and really be careful with that. And yeah, I mean, I think Ibiza's retained its origin. Like there's definitely like it's there, but I'm not going to lie. There's lots of commercialization that's happened over there as well, and you know I think that's probably what Malta's going to face rather soon if it continues to blow up in its popularity. So yeah.
mm. Yeah, and that is interesting actually, because I think there's a fine balance between these types of tourism, and I'm just seeing this quote, sorry, this comment here from the Instagram account Taste of Gozo, who says, quote, quality over quantity. For the love of God, please bring us quality tourists who are here to respect and cherish our past and are interested in preserving our future. Tour operators have a lot to answer for too. Stop encouraging this mass tourism for the quick dollar. Stop killing the very hand that feeds you. And I think you've sort of alluded to it as well when you were comparing it to Las Vegas, because as you highlighted, Malta has an incredible history and culture about itself. But then there's also a massive tourism industry which is not really focused on that. It's just partying.
Mm.
So where do we find this balance of these types of tourists, or where do we find this balance of how can they sort of sit alongside each other and you can sort of do a bit of both? Is there an answer to this, Dave, or are we just waffling? What do we think?
You can make it coexist, but you need to be really careful because you got to make sure the correct regulations are in place. It doesn't stifle growth, but then also retains heritage, and I think that's really hard to do. You know, I'm not gonna lie, it's very
One
hard to do. So yeah.
the two things I will say that like maybe like they maybe they can go hand in hand, but do you remember the castle rave party thing at Wrong Open Air Festival?
Hmm.
I would Could you technically say that's where sort of like two interests collide, because you're there to party, yeah, but like I'm sure I wasn't the only one who was quite curious to know like what even the castle was or who occupied it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's a legit
'Cause you're there.
castle. Like, yeah, it's not been built overnight. That's a legit castle. I think it was built in the 1800s or something.
Yeah.
And I think it was used for a nearby. I think I read a little bit about this, but that place was initially built as a retreat because people used to, like, pirates used to appear and stuff like that. So each little village in Malta used to have some sort of refuge in case pirates appeared that they could basically hide in, sort of thing. And I think that's basically the origin. It might have been a lord's manor at some point as well. But
Yeah.
for context, I think that place has only been doing gigs extremely recently. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's very recent. They've
Yeah.
understood the concept of a gig. Up until that point, it did weddings. That was its main sort of bread and butter, right?
Right.
Because the
Right.
truth
Got
is,
you.
if you just leave something, I'll sort of make this very quick. But where Cafe del Mar is, there's a little castle next to it, right?
Is
Remember,
there?
just right next to Cafe del Mar in Malta, there's like a little castle just next to it. If you remember,
Oh yes, you're right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
if you don't have any industry for your heritage, that's it. Basically, just sits there and does nothing, and basically decays over time. So you need to have some sort of income plan to maintain the buildings. And so weddings was, these guys' way of doing it. But then they start to do music gigs now because it probably is much more lucrative. By all means, do that. That's great, but just be really careful because I can guarantee you, if you go full crazy on gigs, music gigs in this place, it's going to destroy it. People are literally, the stonework's going to erode away over time. So,
Mhm.
like, it's a fine balance. You can't have zero funding to maintain old infrastructure. You still need to turn a profit to maintain the heritage itself, but you need to do it in a way that respects the original buildings. So, yeah.
Yeah, and very well said. And actually, the other point I was going to mention is, you remember the boat party we went on, and when we got on board and we set off out of the harbour, one thing that I would definitely say is, just coming from a party person point of view, who has a bit of interest in the history and culture, don't get me wrong, but obviously when I was on the boat party, understandably so, I was only really interested in the party. However, I will say, when we were coming out, we were looking at like some quite old historic buildings, and I'm not gonna lie, I was quite curious to know, like, oh, what is that? Like,
Mm.
because, do you know what I mean? Like, you see some of these things, these really old structures and whatever, and you're like, wow, what is that? And I remember one in particular was that we actually saw the very tip edge of Valletta, where it was basically the big wall fortifications. And I remember we were with our friend Al, and like, I remember you were saying, oh yeah, that's the very edge of the fortifications. Like, that's that's literally like how they defended Valletta. And like, again, like, you are literally going past a bit of the culture and history, and it's fascinating. And so I think, like, there is sort of that where people can pie, but they'll be passing around old historic stuff. And like, they don't amalgamate, but they do sort of, like, there is that sort of like curiosity connection there. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think we've definitely seen a little bit of that in Croatia as well, where you would have a festival,
Mm.
you enjoy
Yeah.
that festival, but then, like, if it's near like a town or whatever, you still want to go into the town and explore that a bit because it's like an old
Well,
town, you know?
I mean, if anyone's from Croatia, they can educate me on this, but I think they've gone through a similar journey. They had a big civil war, and then they basically, that all got resolved, and they opened their country up for tourism.
Yeah.
And they were just sort of like, okay, we've got no money left because we just had a massive war, but we'd love to attract people to the area. And then everyone was, they tried anything they could to try and build a tourism industry.
Yep.
And now it's much better. But yeah, when we first went there, I feel like it was just, the tourism industry was just learning what the hell it should be.
Yeah.
Because for so long, it had been like a war zone. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's I mean, obviously, if that's not the case, people correct me. It's just what I've vibed with going there myself. But yeah, totally.
No, yeah, and you're absolutely right. And actually, that I would actually probably say to those, Croatia is probably a good example of that. But of course, Malta's conditions a bit different because it's a tiny island with a
Mm.
lot of density. So
Yeah.
obviously, a lot of people, not a lot of land. So you got to work with it. But that would more or less conclude the discussion just about Malta. But I guess in closing, there's no real easy answer to it. And like you said, Dave, I think we can both agree, find the right balance between both types of tourists and don't be a dick on the island. Right, Dave?
Yeah, ultimately, at least when it comes to the party scene, just respect your venues, respect where you stand. You know, don't 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 do something to a historical building that you wouldn't do to your own. It's just a dick move. So yeah,
and that's
yeah,
very well put, Dave. But that would more or less cover episode 7 of Change Faces podcast. And yeah, I just thought we would end on Malta. Obviously, you know, we both went in, as I mentioned, in May, and yeah, like it was amazing. But like it was just interesting to see that come up like afterwards, because obviously even when we were there was a lot of like we actually discovered more festivals when we were there, because we've seen loads of adverts for all these other ones that we've never heard of, right?
yeah, totally.
You took a photo of at least 2, if I remember rightly.
One happened literally this weekend. It's happening now, captured. So yeah, it's crazy.